Introduction. This, first of all, is a book about Nietzsche's philosophy of art, about his view of the genesis of art, of what makes good art good and bad art bad, about, above all, the relationship between art and life. Or rather, it is a book about Nietzsche's philosophies of art, for so runs the central thesis of the book. There is in Nietzsche's no single view of art or of very much else. Rather, his career divides up into different periods, distinguished from each other by sharply contrasting attitudes to and about art. More specifically, I hold that Nietzsche's thought about art divides into four main periods. I also hold, however, that the fourth constitutes a return to the first. In the end, so I argue, the path described by Nietzsche's thought is a circular one. Philosophy is distinguished by the fact that everything is connected with everything else. Of Nietzsche's philosophy, this is even more true than usual. Thus, this is not just a book about art, it is not just an essay in aesthetics, for it turns out that it is not possible to discuss the development of Nietzsche's aesthetics without trying to understand his metaphysics, his fluctuating beliefs concerning the scope of human knowledge, concerning the nature and value of science. Roughly, the higher his valuation of science, the lower his valuation of art, and vice versa. And concerning pessimism, roughly the more seriously he takes pessimism, the more seriously he takes art, and vice versa. And when it comes to Nietzsche's later philosophy of art, it turns out that cannot be understood without confronting the celebrated Nietzschean themes: the death of God, the eternal recurrence, and the idea of the Overman. Interestingly, though, the will to power turns out to be relatively unimportant, but that, it has always seemed to me, is a notion which figures much more prominently in commentaries than in the texts themselves. Hence, what the book offers is a particular perspective on the development of Nietzsche's philosophy as a whole. Chapter 1. Schopenhauer. 1. Nietzsche's thought about art is, as I suggested in the introduction, deeply rooted in the philosophy of Schopenhauer and Schopenhauer's philosophy of art, but in his general philosophy too. Accordingly, in this chapter I provide a brief sketch of Schopenhauer's philosophy as a whole, first a highly impressionistic account of his general philosophy, and then, in somewhat greater detail, an account of his philosophy of art. In doing so, I shall try to present him as Nietzsche saw him, through his eyes and sometimes in his words. Of the several images which might be offered of that clear yet ultimately ambiguous structure which is Schopenhauer's philosophy, this chapter tries to present the Nietzschean image. 2. Schopenhauer's metaphysics, propounded mainly in the first two books of his main work, The World as Will and Representation, 1890, is a version of Kantian idealism. The everyday world, the world given in sense perception, is ideal, mere representation, phenomenon, or appearance, a creation of the human mind quite different in character from the reality, the world in itself that underlies it. In the main, Schopenhauer takes this as simply a datum, as something established beyond all doubt by Kant's great critique of pure reason. Yet he does provide one original and quite uncanny argument for a kind of idealism. This consists in an elaboration of the observation that, as a survival mechanism, the human brain can be expected to present the world to us in a useful rather than a by no means coincident notion, truthful manner. Biological idealism, the idea that we perceive the world in terms of life-preserving errors, is central to Nietzsche's philosophy in all of its phases, and even at his most anti-Schopenhauerian, is prepared to acknowledge his depth in this regard. In the gay science, for instance, he refers to Schopenhauer's immortal doctrine of the instrumental, i.e., practical character of human thought and perception. Notice that the biological route to idealism modifies the character of Kantian strictly transcendental idealism. For according to Kant, it is not merely the world of common sense, but more comprehensively nature, the entire world of space and time that is ideal. Yet an argument to the ideality of the common sense image of the world that is grounded in an appeal to proto-Darwinian facts concerning the biological function of the brain seems to presuppose that the scientific and hence natural image of the world presents it as it really in itself is. The non-natural on sich of Kant's metaphysics is transposed into a natural, albeit esoteric domain.